The closing attorney read my name from the deed, then asked my parents why every dollar of my equity was being wired to my younger brother. My mother sat beside Dylan with a folder she had labeled Family Refinance. My father kept one hand on the unsigned transfer deed in front of me. "There is no equity for Erin," Mom said. "Your signature was a gift." The attorney, Vanessa Cole, turned the recorded deed toward them. "This says Erin Wallace owns an undivided 40% of the property." Then she opened the original settlement file. The wire memo showed $42,000 from my account with the words, "Equity contribution, 40% ownership." The new refinance instructions sent every dollar of cash to Dylan. My parents had not asked me to help my brother refinance his duplex. They had promised him my share and brought me there to sign it away. 4 years earlier, Dylan had found the duplex on Mercer Avenue. It was a red brick building with 2 narrow porches and a shared basement that smelled like wet concrete. The upstairs unit had a long-term tenant. The downstairs unit needed paint, appliances, and someone willing to live beside a furnace that knocked every time it started. Dylan loved it. He was 27 and had spent 6 years installing heating and cooling systems. He understood equipment better than paperwork. His income was steady in practice, but uneven on tax returns because he had started taking independent jobs. The loan officer told him his debt-to-income ratio was too high for the purchase by himself. My parents called me the same evening. "He only needs your signature," Dad said. I worked as a mortgage underwriter. People assumed that meant I approved or denied dreams. Most days it meant I verified whether a file told the same story in every place. Income had to match tax returns. Assets had to match statements. Occupancy had to match intent. A person could be honest and still fail to qualify because hope was not a repayment source. I also knew there was no such thing as only a signature on a mortgage note. "If I sign the note, I owe the debt," I said. "If Dylan misses payments, the lender can collect from me. The balance appears on my credit." Mom spoke next. "He is not going to miss payments. The upstairs rent covers almost half." Almost is not the same as all. "Erin, he finally found a way to own something." That sentence reached the part of me they intended. Dylan had lived with our parents since his engagement ended. He was not lazy. He worked early, came home dirty, and fixed every mechanical problem in their house without charging them. But he had never saved consistently. When a truck failed or a job paid late, his down payment account became an emergency account. I had followed the opposite path. I rented a small apartment, automated my savings, and treated debt like a door that should close behind me. My parents called me careful when they needed advice, and cold when the advice was no. The duplex purchase price was $318,000. Dylan had $8,000 available after inspection and closing costs. The deal needed more cash and stronger qualifying income. I did not agree that night. I asked for the purchase contract, lease, inspection, insurance quote, estimated taxes, and proposed loan terms. Dad complained that I was underwriting my own brother. "That is exactly what you are asking me to do," I said. The numbers were not bad. The upstairs rent was real and documented. Dylan could afford the remaining payment if his work stayed near its 2-year average. The roof was 6 years old. The furnaces were older, but he could maintain them. The property had enough room to improve without depending on impossible appreciation. The risk was not the building. The risk was the word temporary. My parents said I would stay on the loan for 3 years. By then, Dylan would have cleaner self-employment history, documented rental income, and lower revolving debt. He would refinance in his own name and buy out whatever ownership interest we agreed on. I required the part they had skipped. If I was contributing cash and debt capacity, I would also be on the deed. Dad frowned. "Why would you need ownership if you are not living there?" "Because liability without ownership is not help, it is exposure." Dylan surprised me by agreeing. "She should get something," he said. "I could not buy it without her." We worked out an arrangement. I would wire $42,000 toward the down payment and reserves. The recorded deed would give me an undivided 40% interest and Dylan's 60% as tenants in common. Dylan would live downstairs, manage the tenant, handle maintenance, and make the monthly payment from rent and his income. We would review the property after 3 years. He could buy my share based on an independent appraisal, or we could sell. I wrote those terms in an email to all 4 of us. Mom answered with a heart. Dad wrote, "Family takes care of family." Dylan wrote, "I won't forget this. At the original closing, I signed the promissory note, the security documents, and the settlement forms. Dylan signed beside me. The deed listed our percentages exactly. My bank wire went directly to the settlement agent. The memo read, "Equity contribution, 40% ownership, Mercer Avenue duplex." The closing attorney asked whether anyone objected. Nobody did. For the first year, the arrangement worked. Dylan paid on time. He repaired the downstairs furnace, replaced 2 broken windows, and sent me photographs of every improvement. The upstairs tenant renewed her lease. At tax time, we hired an accountant instead of letting Dad build a spreadsheet from online advice. I kept a digital folder with statements, leases, invoices, and the annual escrow analysis. That was not mistrust. It was how I understood peace. When the loan statement arrived, I knew the payment had cleared. When Dylan replaced an appliance, I knew which unit received it. When the property taxes increased, nobody had to remember a conversation differently. My parents mocked the folder, but gently. Mom called it Erin's evidence vault. Dad said I could turn breakfast into a compliance review. Dylan usually defended me. "Leave her alone," he would say. "Her folder got us the loan." By the second year, he stopped saying us. It happened slowly. At family dinners, the duplex became Dylan's building. When the upstairs tenant moved, Mom told relatives that Dylan had renovated both units by himself. When property values rose, Dad said his son had made a brilliant investment. None of those statements was entirely false. Dylan did the physical work. He answered late-night calls. He collected rent and covered 2 months when the upstairs unit was empty. I did not claim those tasks. But each true sentence made my contribution less visible. I became the signature at the beginning of the story, then disappeared from the part where the building gained value. The change became practical when I applied for a small mortgage of my own. The Mercer Avenue debt appeared on my credit report as expected. I could document that Dylan had made the payments, but the obligations still complicated my file. I qualified for less than I wanted and decided to renew my apartment lease. I had known that risk when I signed. I accepted it because the 3-year exit was part of the decision. At the end of year 3, I asked Dylan to order an appraisal and begin the refinance. He said his tax return would be stronger after 1 more filing season. "Then we review in 6 months, I said, "not another 3 years. He agreed. My parents did not. Mom called me the next day. "Why are you putting pressure on him when everything is working?" "Because the agreement included an exit. You are not paying the mortgage. I am still responsible for it. Only on paper. Paper is where mortgages live." She sighed. "Sometimes I think your job has made you unable to see people." 6 months later, the property appraised at $472,000. The mortgage balance had fallen to roughly $241,000. There was real equity now. That was when my parents became interested in the refinance. Dad found a loan officer at Cedar Ridge Lending. He said the new loan could remove me, lower the monthly payment, and give Dylan cash to renovate the basement. Those goals could not all happen automatically. Removing a co-borrower required Dylan to qualify. Taking cash out increased the balance. Buying my ownership required a value and an agreed payment. I asked for the proposed loan structure. Dad sent me a list of documents instead. 2 years of tax returns, recent pay stubs, bank statements, authorization to pull my credit. "Why do they need my income if this loan removes me?" I asked. "They need the history of everyone on the old mortgage." "No, they need payoff information from the old mortgage. This is a new application. Am I a borrower? Only long enough to get it done. There was the first clear break in the story. They were not removing me through Dylan's qualification. They were using me to qualify again. I called the loan officer directly. Her name was Renee Marsh. She confirmed that the proposed cash-out refinance listed Dylan as the occupying borrower and me as a non-occupant co-borrower. The planned loan amount was $368,000. After paying off the old mortgage and estimated closing costs, the transaction could produce more than $110,000 in cash. How are the proceeds allocated? I asked. The preliminary file directs them to Dylan. I assumed you had a separate equity agreement. I have a 40% recorded interest. Renee became careful. Title has not completed its review. The rate is not locked. We can pause until ownership instructions are clear. I told her to pause. That evening, my parents hosted dinner for their 40th anniversary. Dylan, 2 aunts, and my cousin Sarah were there when Dad announced that the duplex refinance was almost finished. Dylan will finally own the place without complications, he said. I set down my glass. What complications? Dad looked at me as if I had made a private joke public. Extra names, extra paperwork. My name represents 40% ownership and full responsibility for the current loan. The new application also keeps me responsible. Mom smiled at Sarah before answering me. Your signature was a gift. The table went quiet. A gift of what? I asked. A chance, she said. You gave your brother a chance to own a home. You did not buy 40% of his life. I wired $42,000. The deed says 40%. Dad leaned forward. Dylan made the payments. Dylan fixed the property. You signed papers and kept a folder. My aunt looked at me with surprise. I thought you only co-signed. That is what we asked her to do, Mom said. No, I said. That is not what we closed. Dylan stared at his plate. I turned to him. What did they tell you would happen to my share? He looked at Mom first. They said you were signing it over at the refinance. For how much? They said you did not want money from me. I waited for him to look at me. Did you ever ask me? I thought you told them. You have my number. Mom stood and began collecting plates even though nobody had finished. We are not ruining our anniversary over legal language. I left before dessert. The next morning, a document appeared in the lender's portal. It was a draft deed transferring my 40% interest to Dylan for no stated payment. My signature line was highlighted in yellow. Below it was a second document titled Proposed Disbursement Direction. After the old mortgage, estimated taxes, and closing costs, the remaining refinance proceeds were to be wired to an account ending in Dylan's 4 digits. The memo line read, Cash out to sole beneficial owner. Erin Wallace equity transfer is family gift. I was still shown as a borrower on the new loan. The structure was now visible in one place. I would sign a new note for $368,000. I would transfer my ownership for nothing. Dylan would receive the cash. My parents had designed a transaction where I kept the debt and lost the asset. I downloaded both documents and called Renee. Who provided the disbursement direction? It came through the title intake packet. From Dylan? The email was sent by your father. Dylan was copied. My father is not a borrower or owner. I understand. That is why title requested a conference. The closing firm was Bishop and Lane, the same office that had handled the original purchase. The assigned attorney, Vanessa Cole, had retrieved the archived settlement file after seeing the ownership percentages. She wanted all owners present before her office prepared anything else. The meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. Dad called before I could answer the invitation. Why did you freeze the file? Because you sent instructions about my equity without my permission. They are draft instructions. That is how closings work. You are not a party to the closing. I am trying to help Dylan organize it. Then organize his documents. Do not direct my proceeds. His voice dropped. Do you understand what you are doing to your brother? Do you understand what you asked me to sign? A deed. It takes your name off the property like you wanted. It leaves my name on a larger loan." He paused. "Only until Dylan refinances again." I almost laughed. The temporary 3-year arrangement had already become 4 years. Now they were offering another temporary loan after stripping away the one protection I had required. "No. Don't make a decision while you are emotional. I am making it because I read the file." He ended the call. Mom moved next. Her first text said Dad had misunderstood the wire instructions. Her second said Dylan deserved the equity because he had made every payment. Her third asked whether 40% was worth losing my family. I answered only the factual part. I have not authorized a deed transfer, a gift, or disbursement of my equity. I will attend Friday's title meeting. Do not represent that I agreed before then. She called twice. I did not answer. That evening, Dylan came to my apartment. He looked exhausted. He still wore his work shirt, with his company name stitched above the pocket. "Can I come in?" I let him sit at the kitchen table. I placed the draft deed and disbursement page between us. "Did you send these instructions?" "Dad did most of the paperwork." "Did you know all the cash was going to you?" "I thought that was how cash out worked. I live there." "Did you know I remained a borrower?" "They said your income had to stay until the next tax return." "Did you know the deed gave you my share for 0? He rubbed both hands over his face. "Mom said you never expected a payout." "What did I say?" "You did not say anything to me." "Exactly." He looked at the original email on my tablet, the one where we agreed on 40%, an appraisal, and a buyout or sale after 3 years. "I forgot about that email." "You forgot the exit. You did not forget that my name got you approved." "That is not fair. I paid the mortgage for 4 years." "You paid it with your income and the property's rent. That is part of why you own 60%. I am not asking for your share." "But if I pay you 40% of today's equity, I may lose the building." "Then the building is worth more than you can afford to own alone." He stood so quickly that the chair scraped the floor. "You sound like a bank." "No, a bank would collect the full note from either of us and never ask which one felt more deserving." He left without saying goodbye. After the door closed, I opened my evidence folder. For years, it had made me feel safe. That night, it made me feel alone. There were 4 years of proof that Dylan had done what he promised operationally. Every mortgage payment was on time. The rent deposits were documented. Repairs had invoices. He had turned a neglected duplex into a stable property. There were also 4 years of proof that I had remained exposed. The mortgage balance appeared on every credit report. My original wire had stayed in the property. I had postponed my own plans while the equity grew. Both stories were true. My parents treated one truth as if it erased the other. I built a 1-page timeline for Friday. Original purchase price, my wire amount, recorded ownership percentages, mortgage balance, current appraisal, proposed new loan, draft distribution. I did not calculate the exact amount I believed I was owed. That required selling costs, verified capital improvements, and an independent agreement. I did not want to overstate my claims simply because my parents had tried to erase it. On Thursday, Renee sent the preliminary loan estimate. The interest rate box said not locked. I read every page. The loan amount was correct for the parents' plan. My name appeared as co-borrower. The projected payment was higher than the current one. The cash out depended on both incomes. Nothing in the document bought out my ownership. At the bottom of my reply, I wrote one sentence. I do not consent to a rate lock or further processing until the title and equity conflict is resolved in writing. Renee acknowledged it. That night, I spread the original closing package across my kitchen table. I had reviewed thousands of mortgage files for strangers. I knew how quickly a family story could become a number in a system. A daughter with good credit became qualifying income. A brother with a promising business became variable earnings. A duplex became collateral. The system did not know who fixed the furnace or who was expected to surrender first. That was why the documents mattered. The original loan estimate showed the debt I had agreed to carry. The closing disclosure showed my money entering the transaction. The deed showed what I received in exchange for that risk. None of those records said temporary signature, honorary owner, or gift. My parents had not objected when the lender needed my tax returns. They had not called the note legal language when my income helped Dylan qualify. They trusted every page that made the purchase possible. Only the pages protecting me had become technicalities. I opened the listing for the small townhouse I had considered buying during the second year. It had sold long ago. I did not blame Dylan for that. I had known his mortgage could affect my borrowing power, and I had accepted the risk for 3 years. What I had not accepted was an exit that moved whenever I reached it. First, Dylan needed one more tax return. Then he needed a cash-out renovation. Then my name had to remain for only one more loan. Every delay sounded reasonable when viewed alone. Together, they formed a future in which my obligation ended only after nobody needed me. I closed the listing. Then I made myself consider the opposite argument as seriously as I would in an underwriting review. Dylan had made every payment. He had improved both units. He had answered tenant calls and handled vacancies. If we sold, he would lose the place where he had lived and worked for 4 years. My parents were wrong about my ownership, but they were not inventing his effort. I wrote that on the timeline too. Dylan's verified payments and documented improvements must be included in any accounting. That sentence cost me nothing. It also prevented anger from turning my evidence into a weapon. I was not going to claim that wiring money made me the person who had rebuilt the kitchen. I was not going to demand half of property I owned at 40%. I was not going to erase Dylan because my parents had erased me. But fairness had to work in both directions, or it was only favoritism with better manners. Near midnight, Mom sent a photograph from the original purchase day. Dylan stood on the downstairs porch holding a ring of keys. I was beside him with one hand raised against the sun. Mom had written a caption beneath it. "Look how happy you were to help him." I remembered that day. I had been happy. That did not prove the money was a gift. It proved consent could exist once and still have limits. I replied with the only question that mattered. Why did the original deed give me 40% if everyone understood I owned nothing? She did not answer. At work the next morning, I reviewed a file in which a bank statement was missing one page. The borrower had provided every balance and transaction except the page containing a large deposit. The loan officer called it an administrative gap. It was not the size of the gap that mattered. It was the fact that the missing page held the answer. My family's missing page was consent. They had a plan for my income, a plan for my credit, a plan for my deed, and a plan for my proceeds. The only part they had never obtained was my yes. Friday morning, I arrived at Bishop and Lane 10 minutes early. The conference room had frosted glass walls and a long table marked by faint circles from coffee cups. Vanessa Cole sat at the far end with 2 files open in front of her. Dylan arrived next. My parents came together. Mom carried her family refinance folder. Dad placed the unsigned transfer deed in front of my chair as if giving me a task. Renee joined by video on the wall screen. Vanessa began without accusation. "We are here because the current title, original settlement record, proposed borrower structure, and disbursement direction do not tell the same story. I cannot proceed until the owners give lawful and consistent instructions." Dad folded his arms. "This is a simple family refinance. Erin is making it complicated." Vanessa opened the first file. "The recorded deed is not complicated." She read the ownership language aloud. Erin Wallace, an undivided 40% interest, and Dylan Wallace, an undivided 60% interest, as tenants in common. Mom interrupted. "Those numbers were for the lender." Vanessa looked at her. A lender does not assign private ownership percentages on a deed to make someone qualify. The grantees accepted this deed at the original closing. She opened the archived settlement ledger. The original transaction received $42,000 from Erin Wallace. Then she read the wire memo. Equity contribution, 40% ownership, Mercer Avenue duplex. Dad shifted in his chair. We all knew it was to help Dylan. Help and ownership are not mutually exclusive, Vanessa said. She placed the proposed disbursement direction beside the deed. This new instruction sends the net proceeds to Dylan and describes Erin's ownership as a family gift. Erin did not sign it. Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, neither of you owns the property or borrows under the proposed loan. You cannot direct her equity. Mom turned to me. Your signature was a gift. We have explained this. You have repeated it, I said. You never asked it. Dad tapped the deed. Dylan has put 4 years of work into that building. That may matter in a negotiated accounting, Vanessa said. It does not erase a recorded interest by itself. Dylan leaned forward. What would happen if Erin signed this deed today? Vanessa answered him directly. She would transfer the ownership interest described in the document. Under the current loan structure, she would still sign the new promissory note as a co-borrower. So she would owe the mortgage but not own the building? Under these drafts, yes. He looked at Dad. You told me the refinance removed her. Eventually, Dad said, once your income improves. The word landed harder when someone else heard it. Eventually. Mom opened her folder and pulled out a handwritten page. This family has invested in Dylan for years. We did not raise our children to charge each other market value. You did not invest my $42,000, I said. I did. Because we asked you to help. I helped under written terms. You changed those terms when the property became valuable. Renee spoke from the screen. For clarity, the lender has not locked a rate. The application can remain paused, be restructured, or be withdrawn. We cannot close with conflicting title instructions. Vanessa asked me what outcome I wanted. There were several answers available. I could demand that the new loan pay me 40% of every available dollar before Dylan received anything. I could refuse all cooperation and push for an immediate sale. I could send the documents to every relative who believed I had only signed my name. I could also sign, preserve the peace, and spend another unknown number of years responsible for a building I no longer owned. That was the only option no longer available to me. I am withdrawing from this refinance application, I said. Dad pushed his chair back. You cannot decide that for Dylan. I am deciding it for me. The current application depends on my income and credit. I do not authorize a rate lock, a new note, this deed, or the disbursement instruction. I opened my laptop and sent the withdrawal to Renee while everyone watched. She confirmed receipt. The file stopped before the rate was locked. No one tore up a contract. No bank seized the property. Dylan still owned 60%, I still owned 40%, and the existing mortgage continued exactly as before. The only thing that disappeared was the plan built on my automatic yes. In the parking lot, Dad caught up with me. You just cost your brother the best rate he may see this year. There was no locked rate. You know what I mean. I know exactly what a rate lock means. That is why I withdrew before one existed. Mom came through the glass doors behind him. Are you proud of yourself? I looked at both of them. No, I am protected from a transaction I did not agree to. Those are different feelings. Dylan walked past us without stopping. For the next week, my parents told the family I had canceled his refinance over a technicality. Sarah called first. She had heard that I refused to sign because Dylan would not give me half the building. I do not own half, I said. I own 40%. I refused a larger loan that kept me responsible while transferring my ownership for no payment. That is not what Aunt Susan said. I know. I did not send Sarah the deed. I did not forward the wire memo or the draft instructions. She had not asked me for money or participated in the transaction. A correction did not require turning the family chat into a title archive. I sent one written summary to the people who had heard Mom's statement at the anniversary dinner. The existing mortgage remains current. I withdrew only from a proposed cash-out refinance that retained me as a borrower while transferring my recorded ownership without compensation. Dylan and I will resolve the property directly, Dad replied to the group. Cold words do not make a cold act right. I did not answer. The first conversation that mattered happened with Dylan 2 weeks later. He asked to meet at the duplex. I had not been inside for almost a year. The downstairs unit no longer looked neglected. Dylan had refinished the floors, installed warm kitchen lights, and built storage beneath the stairs. Upstairs, the new tenant kept herbs in every window. He had made the property better. That was true before the closing meeting and remained true after it. We sat at the downstairs kitchen table. I cannot qualify for the new loan without you, he said. Then that loan is too large for you alone. I could qualify for the current balance, maybe a little more, not enough to pay you 40% of the appraisal. Then we need another option. He looked around the kitchen. You mean sell? Or obtain an independent buyout within 90 days. I am not forcing a listing tomorrow. Mom says you planned this from the beginning. If I planned to take the building, why does the deed give you 60%? He looked down. She said the percentages were your way of feeling safe. They were my way of being safe. I showed him my proposed accounting method. We would use a new appraisal. We would verify the mortgage payoff. Dylan would receive credit for documented capital improvements he had paid beyond ordinary maintenance. After estimated sale expenses or agreed buyout costs, the remaining equity would follow the recorded percentages. You would credit the improvements? Yes, I am not pretending your work did not exist because they pretended my money did not exist. He was quiet for a long time. I should have asked you. Yes. I wanted to believe them because their version gave me everything. That was the first honest apology in the story. We hired an appraiser neither of us had used before. The property came in slightly lower than the first estimate, at $468,000. We also hired a mediator with real estate accounting experience. Dylan produced receipts for the windows, appliances, flooring materials, and a drainage repair. Some items were maintenance, not capital improvements. We disagreed about them without calling each other disloyal. The process took 5 weeks. Dylan applied for a loan sized to the current payoff and a partial buyout. He could not qualify for enough to meet the agreed number. Our parents offered to co-sign for him, then learned their retirement income and existing debts did not support the amount either. For the first time, the risk they had assigned to me arrived at their own application. They did not sign. Dylan listed the duplex before the 90 days ended. Mom accused me of making him sell his home. Dad said I had used professional knowledge against someone who trusted me. I answered them once. Dylan owned 60%, received credit for his improvements, and chose a sale after he could not fund a buyout. I did not create the numbers. I stopped you from hiding them. They did not speak to me for 2 months. The duplex sold to a teacher and her sister. One planned to live downstairs. The other wanted the upstairs unit after the tenant's lease ended. At the sale closing, Vanessa handled the file again. This time, every instruction matched. The old mortgage was paid off. Selling costs were listed. Dylan received the agreed improvement credit. The remaining proceeds were divided according to our settlement. My wire was $78,400. Dylan received more because of his 60% share and improvement credit. No one received a hidden gift. Before I signed the deed to the buyers, Vanessa asked whether I understood that I was transferring my entire interest. Yes, I said. She asked whether the proceeds matched my agreement. Yes. She asked whether anyone had promised or instructed me to sign for another purpose. No. Those questions took less than a minute. They were the questions my family had tried to skip. When the mortgage payoff reached the credit bureaus, the Mercer Avenue balance finally disappeared from my report. I printed the updated page, then laughed at myself for printing something I could save digitally. The paper mattered anyway. It showed a debt I had knowingly accepted and deliberately ended. Dylan rented an apartment for 6 months. With his sale proceeds, cleaner tax history, and no duplex payment, he later qualified for a modest townhome in his own name. He sent me the loan estimate and asked whether I would review it. "Review, yes," I said. "Sign, no." I know. He did know by then. I checked the rate, fees, cash to close, and whether the rate was locked. I sent him 4 questions to ask his loan officer. He handled the answers himself. Our relationship became more direct after that. He stopped letting Mom translate my intentions. I stopped assuming he understood terms just because they were written once. We did not become business partners again. My parents remained harder. Mom eventually sent an email saying they had only wanted Dylan to have the stability I already possessed. Dad wrote that parents sometimes had to balance what one child had against what another needed. Neither message contained the words, "We were wrong." I replied with the boundary instead of demanding the sentence. "You may ask me for advice. You may not volunteer my income, credit, signature, property, or time. You may not communicate consent on my behalf. I will not co-sign another family loan." Dad called it legalistic. I called it complete. For years, my family had treated paperwork as the cold version of love. They believed the warm version lived in assumptions, favors, and promises made across a table. But the deed did not damage us. The wire memo did not betray anyone. The closing attorney did not create the conflict by reading them. Those records preserved the agreement we had all accepted before the equity made forgetting profitable. I kept my evidence folder. I renamed it Mercer Avenue, Closed. Inside were the original deed, the first wire, the failed refinance drafts, and the final settlement statement. I did not keep them because I expected another fight. I kept them because memory becomes generous to the person who benefited most. My signature had helped my brother. My money had helped him. My credit had carried risk beside his. None of that was a gift simply because my parents preferred not to repay it. A gift begins with the giver knowing what leaves their hands. If someone calls your signature a formality, read the debt attached to it. If they call it a gift, make sure the choice was ever yours.